All right.
So, Peter, tell us a little bit about just moving water around your book about dory fishing, its genesis, and so on.
All right. Well, as you mentioned, maybe it would be pertinent to know something about my past here.
Yes, I think it'd be good.
I arrived in Cannon Beach when I was just a slip of a lad, just after the Great War. Not one, it was two.
Oh, two,
And
yeah.
They still had observation little buildings along the coastline to watch for Japanese aircraft. And we would come to Cannon Beach virtually every summer from that time on, and eventually settled here in 1954. My family moved to Cannon Beach. Both of my brothers were involved in the shipbuilding industry, and when my brother returned from Hallandale, Florida, he had a dory boat. There were 3 or 4 dory boats operating in Cannon Beach, all for sport fishing purposes. And I was fortunate enough to be able to fish with my brother and some of the others when I was barely a teenager.
So the genesis of the commercial dory fishing in Cannon Beach, at least, was sort of a little bit in the late 60s, and then into the
Right.
70s it hit its heyday, right?
Right. There were a few scattered commercial troll dory fishermen in the late 60s. By the time my brother returned from Florida, where he'd been building boats with my older half-brother, it was about 1972 or 3. And I was fortunate enough to be privy to the fleet. The fleet was a fleet composed of probably 5 or 6 active fishermen at that time, and they used traditional dories. Most of them were either home fabricated or old double end pointed on both ends dory boats. Often they were rowed through the waves to get out past the surf line, and then they would drop the motor. It was pretty seat-of-your-pants activity in those days, frankly, and there was a lot of sort of homespun, traditionally passed down lore as far as the rigging of the gear itself and techniques for fishing. And dory fishing has been going on, and the use of dories for hundreds of years, if not more, to Europe and the East Coast. Its earliest, excuse me.
Yeah, no. So your background as a folklorist, what interests you about the dory fishing in Cannon Beach?
Well, one of the things about dory fishing, the commercial dory fleet, was that it was a unique activity that was traditionally based, and the techniques for fishing itself and for constructing the boats were handed down in many cases orally, and you learned how to practice the trade by actually fishing. Mm-hmm. And that required someone of some savvy and knowledge, and then a novitiate or a number of people in this case who sort of learned from those scant few people who were actually able to eke out not a living, but a nice supplemental living.
And so the book's going to be kind of a combination of stories about fishing, and then a little bit of history and folklore and that sort of thing.
Exactly. I'm interested in the oral history aspect, because what happens frequently with a subgroup, loggers of a certain ilk that harvested trees in a particular fashion, or whalers, for instance, some more rigorous activities, or commercial fishing, or sailing on old sailing vessels. As the years advance, those techniques and traditions and stories and the lore inherent in undertaking those activities vanishes. And in our case, by about 1982 or maybe 83, the salmon stocks had depleted so significantly that it just didn't make sense to fish any longer. And to all intents and purposes, it's vanished along our coastline commercially. Right. There's still a few sports fishermen, There are a few sports